She gets her share because family comes first. That's what my dad said, sliding a contract across the table, demanding 40% of my company for my sister. I refused. They teamed up with my competitors, lost in court, and watched their startup collapse as I walked out with everything. What's up, Reddit? This whole thing started because my dad thought he could corner me at a family dinner and hand 40% of my company to my sister like it was a birthday present. Thought that was the end of it. Turns out they had other plans. Here's how it all started. I grew up in a house where my last name was supposed to mean something. Mercer. Around town, people used to connect it to my dad's freight business, Mercer Hauling. Back in the day, he ran half the regional shipping out of this state. But growing up, it was obvious there were favorites in the family. Laura, my younger sister, was always the star child. My dad, Richard, treated her like she could do no wrong. Dance classes, private school, her first car at 16. It all came easy. I wasn't jealous back then. I was busy working part-time jobs, fixing up junk cars, saving money because I knew if I wanted anything, I'd be on my own. Diana, my stepmom, ran a small portfolio of lifestyle businesses. Enough staff to act like a CEO. Enough distance to dodge the mess when things went sideways. By my 20s, Mercer Hauling was circling the drain. Bad loans, frozen trucks, contracts falling apart. Richard pretended it was fine. Laura was in California playing influencer, burning money. I was learning automation, drone tech, lining up real contracts. 3 years ago, Mercer Hauling hit bottom. Richard came to me, banks closing in. I bailed him out with my personal funds. The deal? I save him. Ironclad stays mine. Full control. He signed, notarized, no hesitation. Before that, he held 30% of shares and their votes through a family holding company, pledged during Ironclad's early days. When I bailed him out, those shares came back clean. From then on, control wasn't fuzzy. It was mine. Now here we were, 3 years later, at his house for one of those family dinners Diana loved to host. Big estate, long oak table like something out of a magazine, candles lit, the smell of roasted chicken filling the room. Diana sat at the far end like royalty, Laura already glued to her phone. I took my usual seat 3 spots down from Richard. The old man looked tired, but still carried himself like he was in charge of something. Dinner started normal. Salad no one touched, rice pilaf. Richard asking about the weather like we didn't all have the same weather app. Laura talked about some brand deal she had going on Instagram. I just nodded and cut into my chicken. Halfway through, Richard set his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and pulled a folder from beside his chair. He slid it across the table toward me. The scrape of paper on wood was louder than it should have been. Colt, he said, it's time we make things right for the family. Laura will inherit 40% of Ironclad Dynamics, effective immediately. Laura smirked like she'd already won. Diana sipped her water slowly, watching me. I didn't touch the folder. 40%? I said, voice flat. Richard nodded. You wouldn't have half of what you do without this family's name. It's only fair she gets her share. I looked at Laura. She didn't say a word, just leaned back like this was already settled. I set my fork down carefully. Fair, I repeated. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a thicker black folder. Mine wasn't new, corners bent from being opened too many times. I flipped it open, found the page I wanted, and slid a copy across the table toward him. Page 9, I said. Richard frowned but pulled it closer. He adjusted his glasses, started reading. The room went quiet. His fork slipped off his plate and hit the floor. Laura leaned over, trying to read it too. Diana finally broke the silence. What is this, Colt? I kept my eyes on Richard. 3 years ago, when Mercer Hauling was weeks from bankruptcy, you came to me. I cleared the debts. You signed the release that reassigned the 30% voting block you controlled through the family holding company, plus the covenant that bars any transfers without my approval. Your signature, witnesses, notarized. Richard flipped through the pages like something would change if he looked hard enough. It wouldn't. Lara crossed her arms. Dad, he tricked you. I shook my head. Nothing tricky about it. Lawyers read it. You all knew what it said. Diana leaned forward. Colt, this family built you. Your father's name. My work built Ironclad, I said. Not the family name. Not handouts. Not a legacy I never saw until it was already falling apart. Richard set the papers down slowly. This company exists because of this family, he muttered, but the edge in his voice was gone. No, I said, standing. It exists because I didn't let everything collapse when you were ready to let it burn. The air in the room went heavy. Nobody moved. Lara snapped, You can't just shut us out, Colt. We're family. I picked up my folder. Family doesn't spring contracts over dinner. Diana's voice sharpened. Where are you going? Back to work, I said. The place that actually pays for all this. Richard opened his mouth, closed it again. I left the house without looking back. The contract stayed on the table. So did the silence. Page 9 said everything for me. On the next morning, I woke up to 10 missed calls and 24 texts before the sun was even up. Most were from people I barely talk to anymore. Old friends, a couple college buddies, some extended relatives I hadn't heard from in years. The first message I read was from Tessa, my assistant. Turn on channel 6. Now. I did. On the screen, sitting under perfect lighting, was my stepmother Diana with Laura right next to her. Both of them looked like they were about to accept humanitarian awards instead of throwing me under the bus. My husband was under tremendous stress at the time, Diana was saying. Voice calm, but with that fake sadness she was so good at. He didn't understand what he was signing. Colt presented documents in the middle of a crisis. We thought it was help. It turned out to be a trap. Lara jumped in right on cue. He manipulated Dad when he was vulnerable. Now he's cutting his own family out of the company, like we're strangers. She even dabbed her eye like she was about to cry. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, Mercer Family Rift. Son accused of forcing father out of company. I muted the TV before the reporter could start fishing for more drama. By the time I got to the office downtown, the lobby was buzzing. Reporters weren't there yet, but they would be. A few employees were clustered around phones, looking uneasy. Investors had already started calling Tessa, asking if operations were stable. That was code for, is this about to tank the company? I walked straight into my office. Tessa was waiting, tablet in hand, hair pulled back like she'd been up for hours already. They hit every morning show, she said without looking up from the screen. Diana told the Herald you tricked Richard into signing over Ironclad while he was mentally exhausted. Lara says you're trying to destroy the family legacy. I sat down. And investors? Half want reassurance. The other half want to know if you're getting sued. She finally looked at me. You need to get in front of this. Today. I nodded once. Set it up. Press conference? Yeah. Noon. Keep it simple. Facts only. She was already typing before I finished talking. While she handled logistics, I pulled the original documents from the safe in my office. Not copies, originals. Contracts with Richard's full signature, dated and notarized. Bank transfer receipts from the bailout 3 years ago. Even the emails where he thanked me for keeping the family out of bankruptcy court. Every page stamped, filed, and beyond dispute. By 10, the story was everywhere. Blogs, local, national, framed like I'd stolen the company in the dead of night. Lara had given a quote to one site saying, I betrayed Dad's trust for personal gain. That one stung, but I didn't respond. Not yet. Around 11, Lena, my girlfriend, called. Colt, she started carefully. I didn't want to do this over the phone, but I think I need some space. I closed my eyes for a second. Because of the news. Because of all of it, she said. My parents called me this morning asking what kind of person you really are. My boss cornered me at work like I'm supposed to have answers. I can't handle the spotlight. I didn't argue. Couldn't. I get it, I said finally. I just need time, she added, softer this time. Take it, I told her. Then I hung up before the silence dragged on too long. Tessa poked her head in a minute later. You good? Yeah, I lied. We ready? Reporters are already gathering downstairs. At noon sharp, I stepped into the lobby. Cameras clicked instantly, voices shouting questions before I even reached the podium. Mr. Mercer, did you manipulate your father? Is the company being taken from your family? I held up a hand. They quieted just enough. I've seen the interviews this morning, I said, voice steady. And since private matters have now been made public, I'm going to set the record straight. I placed the folder on the podium and opened it so the cameras could see the pages. 3 years ago, when Richard Mercer's personal debts threatened to wipe out everything he owned, including this company's early assets, I stepped in. With my money, my contracts, my risk. In return, Richard signed this. I held up the agreement. This is the reallocation of voting control from the family holding company back to me, together with a no transfer covenant. Signed, witnessed, notarized, filed. Flashes popped from cameras. This was no trick, I continued. It was the only reason the family kept the house they live in now. The only reason Mercer Hauling didn't go to auction. Every signature here was voluntary. Every term reviewed. I let that sit for a second before finishing. Anyone claiming otherwise is free to read the same documents you're looking at now. I closed the folder. That's all for today. Reporters shouted more questions as I walked off, but I didn't stop. Back upstairs, Tessa was waiting by the elevator. You just poured gasoline on it, she said. Good, I replied. Let it burn if it has to. At least the truth's in writing. By Monday morning, the press conference had calmed investors for all of 24 hours. Then Skyreach Robotics announced something that made my stomach drop. They posted a flashy promo video for a new drone system called Talon H. Same cargo capacity specs as ours. Same weatherproof design. Even the modular battery swap tech we'd been testing in-house was right there in their marketing slides like they invented it. Tessa called me the second she saw it. Colt, these numbers. They're ours, she said, voice tight. Exact specs from last month's engineering review. I opened the slides she sent over. She wasn't exaggerating. The lift and endurance numbers matched our internal rounding signature. 2 decimal truncation on lift, 3 on endurance, exactly how we format engineering reviews. Who had access to the review files? I asked. Engineering leads. Me. You. Legal counsel for the patents. Legal counsel. My jaw tightened. Harlow? Yeah, she said. Why? I didn't answer right away. Martin Harlow had been my dad's attorney for 20 years. Handled everything from property taxes to business permits. After I started Ironclad, he handled some early filings before we moved to a bigger firm. The guy knew the family inside out. And 3 weeks ago, I'd given him access to the prototype specs for an intellectual property insurance policy he said we needed. Our broker required counsel to validate the covered IP schedule, so we granted time-boxed, read-only access. Get a T on the line, I told Tessa. I want a full access log for the review files. An hour later, our head of security, Raj, walked into my office with a printout. He pointed to the timestamps. External download at 2:13 a.m., 3 weeks back. Credentials used, Harlow's email. Location? IP address resolves to a condo downtown. An address linked to Harlow on public filings. I didn't need more. I called Harlow myself. He picked up on the second ring. Colt, he said smoothly, like nothing was wrong. I figured you'd be calling. You leaked it, I said flatly. A pause. Let's not use words like that. They launched Talon H with our numbers, Martin. Exact numbers. He cleared his throat. Skyreach approached me weeks ago. They said Ironclad was unstable with all this family drama. They offered to acquire your assets if things went south. I simply facilitated conversations. You sold them our tech, I snapped. I protected options, he said calmly. Your father and Diana want stability. Skyreach has resources. If control shifts in the family's favor, an acquisition could be beneficial. I hung up before I said something that would get me arrested. Tessa was waiting outside my office. Well, he's with Skyreach, I said. I had Dennis fire off litigation hold letters and a cease and desist for misappropriation, preservation notices to Skyreach and Harlow the same hour. She swore under her breath. Before we could plan our next move, Raj rushed in again, phone in hand. You need to see this, he said, pulling up an email from our bank. Notice of temporary asset freeze. Ironclad Dynamics. It hit our primary operating accounts at First National. I read it twice. The order came from county court on an emergency motion filed by Mercer Family Interests, claiming disputed ownership of Ironclad assets pending litigation. They framed Ironclad as disputed property via the holding company, claiming the transfer was voidable for incapacity and duress. Thin, but enough for a 2 a.m. duty judge to grant a short ex parte freeze. Effective immediately, Raj read over my shoulder. The primary operating accounts at First National are frozen until the preliminary hearing. Payroll, vendor payments, fuel contracts, everything tied to First National. A small contingency reserve at Ridgeview wasn't named in the order. 3 days of fuel and maintenance, then we were dry. Who filed it? I asked. Raj pointed to the signature line. Attorney of record, Martin Harlow. Tessa looked ready to break something. He didn't waste time, she said. The timing was perfect for them. Payroll was due Friday. We had supplier invoices hitting tomorrow. Freeze the accounts long enough, contractors walk off, projects stall, investors panic. Skyreach swoops in offering stability. I called our corporate attorney, Dennis Wu. He picked up on the first ring. We saw the filing, he said immediately. Total overreach. They're arguing the transfer of ownership to you is under dispute because Richard claims he didn't understand what he signed. He understood, I said. Doesn't matter. All they need is a judge willing to grant a temporary freeze until a hearing. It buys them time. How soon can we get it lifted? Earliest hearing is Thursday. Until then, accounts stay locked. Harlow had posted a token bond and caught a lenient duty judge overnight. Thin affidavit. Big impact. Classic ex parte maneuver. I hung up, feeling the walls closing in. Tessa pulled up a spreadsheet on the conference room screen. We've got enough in the Ridgeview contingency reserve to keep fuel and maintenance running for 3 days. After that, deliveries stop. And payroll? I asked. She shook her head, frozen with everything else. I stood there staring at the numbers. Years of work, contracts across 3 states, all hanging by a thread because my father, sister, and a lawyer with a god complex decided to play corporate chess. Get Dennis everything he needs for Thursday, I said finally. Contracts, signatures, bank transfers, witness statements, everything. Tessa nodded. And Skyreach? I looked at the Talon H slides still on the screen. Let them celebrate early. They won't own a damn thing when this is over. Outside the conference room window, one of our real drones lifted off from the test pad, carrying a steel container across the yard. At least the machine still worked even if the system around them was being strangled. By evening, news of the asset freeze was everywhere. Reporters camped outside the building, asking if Ironclad was going bankrupt. Lara gave another interview calling it the first step to fixing the company Dad built. I saved it. Thursday wasn't far away. By Tuesday morning, satellite vans choked the curb. Boom mics over the sidewalk. Our lobby felt like a live set. Headlines screamed about family civil war and the future of American drone tech under threat. I spent most of the morning on the phone with Dennis, our attorney, building the case to lift the freeze at Thursday's hearing. We had contracts, bank statements, notary records, but it still felt like we were stuck playing defense. That changed just after lunch. Tessa buzzed my office. Colt, you're going to want to take this, she said. A minute later, a woman I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years walked in carrying a thick folder. Samantha Cross. She used to be the finance manager at one of Diana's companies before she disappeared from the family orbit. Word was she and Diana had a falling out over money, but I never got the full story. Colt, she said, setting the folder on my desk. I think it's time somebody told you what's been going on. I opened the folder. The first page was an email printout between Diana and Grant Halstead, CEO of Skyreach Robotics. Subject line, Ironclad Transition Plan. The emails were blunt. Diana and Lara discussing how to pressure Colt publicly, Grant offering to handle key engineering talent once the transfer happens. Martin Harlow talking about legal timing for the injunction. There were even payment records, 5-figure transfers from a Skyreach shell company into an account registered to Harlow Consulting LLC. I flipped page after page while Samantha explained. Diana brought me in to clean up some accounts last year, she said. What I found looked off. Payments to consultants that didn't make sense. I started digging. Then I saw Grant's name. When I asked questions, she cut me out. So I kept copies. Tessa leaned over my shoulder, eyes widening at the bank transfers. This is conspiracy, she said quietly. Samantha nodded. They were planning this for months. The press interviews, the injunction, even Skyreach's product launch. It's all connected. I looked up at her. Why bring this to me now? Because Diana thinks she can steamroll everyone, Samantha said flatly. And because I'm tired of watching her burn people down. Dennis had her sign a sworn declaration on the spot and filed the packet as supplemental evidence with a request for limited authentication. The judge accepted it subject to verification. Good enough for Thursday. I didn't waste time. Within the hour, Dennis had the folder. He nearly smiled for the first time since this started. This changes everything, he said, flipping through the documents. We'll file it under supplemental evidence ahead of Thursday's hearing. The payments alone kill their credibility. The emails tie Skyreach directly to the family's legal maneuvering. Judge will see this for what it is. While Dennis prepped the court filing, I asked Tessa to leak a few key pages to the press, just enough to get the story moving before Diana and Grant could spin it. Not the whole folder, only email headers and a redacted payment stub linking Skyreach to Harlow's LLC. No schematics, no flight curves. The technical exhibits went to the court under seal. By late afternoon, Tech Finance Daily ran a headline. Documents suggest Skyreach. Mercer family coordinated against Ironclad CEO. 2 hours later, another outlet ran with, leaked payments show possible conflict of interest in Ironclad ownership dispute. Diana went silent. So did Lara. Grant Halstead's Twitter account locked itself down after reporters started tagging him under every article. Inside Ironclad, the mood shifted fast. Procurement had us in source selection for months. The only question mark was responsibility. Would a court fight brand us as unstable? A ruling could clear that in one line. 2 of our board members, guys who'd been on the fence since the injunction, called for a private meeting. They showed up at HQ just before 6. Colt, one of them said, if these documents hold up, you've got our support. We won't entertain any leadership changes until this is resolved. That was the first real win in days. With their votes, no hostile takeover attempt could pass the board. Not even if Diana convinced every remaining member. I spent the evening coordinating with Dennis for Thursday. He wanted everything in order. The original transfer contracts, the new evidence, Samantha on standby as a witness if needed. Before leaving, I stopped by the engineering floor. The guys there had been working under insane pressure, testing drones while reading headlines about the company possibly collapsing. I told them payroll would be late if the freeze held, but that Ironclad wasn't going anywhere. One of the engineers, Matt, nodded toward a half-assembled cargo drone. As long as we keep building, he said, they can't kill it. That hit harder than I expected. By the time I left the office, the press was in full feeding frenzy over the leaked documents. News anchors were suddenly using phrases like corporate sabotage and undisclosed financial ties instead of painting me as the villain. Tessa called as I got in my truck. Just heard from an investor, she said. He's not pulling out anymore. Said you finally turned this around. Not yet, I told her. Thursday decides everything. Still, for the first time since this started, it felt like we had the upper hand. Thursday morning, downtown courthouse, 9th floor. The hallway outside courtroom 3 was packed with reporters, lawyers hauling boxes, and people craning their necks for a look at anyone involved in the Mercer case. I walked in with Dennis Wu, our attorney, and 2 paralegals carrying binders stacked high with evidence. Tessa trailed behind, phone in hand, already coordinating with our PR team for whatever came after the hearing. At the other end of the hall, Diana stood next to Lara like they were attending a photo shoot, both in tailored suits, smiles ready for the cameras. Martin Harlow, the lawyer who started this mess, was flipping through his notes like he hadn't been caught taking money from Skyreach. The bailiff called us in. The courtroom itself was quiet, except for the shuffle of papers as everyone found their seats. Judge Reynolds presided, a tall man in his 60s with glasses low on his nose, known for hating anything that wasted his time. Case number, the clerk read, Mercer Family Interests versus Colt Mercer and Ironclad Dynamics. Diana's attorney, a sharp-looking guy named Peterson, started first. Your Honor, this case is about a son taking advantage of his father during a time of personal and financial stress. We are seeking to maintain the temporary injunction to prevent further harm while ownership issues are resolved. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence to show the transfer of ownership was obtained illegally or under duress? We have testimony, Peterson said. Family members who will confirm Richard Mercer was not aware of the full implications when he signed. Documents? The judge asked. Not at this time, Peterson admitted. Reynolds made a note without looking up. Then Dennis stood. Your Honor, if I may. The judge gestured for him to proceed. Dennis walked to the evidence table and began laying out binders one by one. First, the original transfer agreement dated March 14th, 3 years ago, signed by Richard Mercer, notarized, with 2 independent witnesses. No disputes raised at the time, no claims of coercion until this month. He handed copies to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. Second, Dennis continued, bank records showing $2.4 million wired from Colt Mercer's personal accounts to cover Mercer hauling debts within 48 hours of the signing. Without those funds, the company and multiple family properties would have been seized by creditors. More copies passed to the bench. Third, Dennis said, holding up another folder, emails between Richard Mercer and Colt Mercer following the bailout, thanking him for the assistance and explicitly acknowledging the transfer terms. Dated weeks and months after the signing. Not a single mention of confusion or coercion. The judge flipped through a few pages, scanning quickly. And finally, Dennis said, voice steady, recent evidence showing the plaintiffs coordinated with Skyreach Robotics and attorney Martin Harlow to time this injunction with a competing product launch. Payments from Skyreach to Harlow Consulting documented here. He placed the bank records and emails on top of the stack. These funds were never disclosed to the court until our team obtained them from a whistleblower inside Diana Mercer's own company. Peterson shifted uncomfortably at his table. The judge looked at him over his glasses. Do you contest any of these documents? Peterson cleared his throat. We have not reviewed them in full, Your Honor. Reynolds closed the folder in front of him. Then why exactly am I being asked to maintain a freeze on this company's accounts if you have no evidence beyond accusations? Peterson started to speak, but the judge held up a hand. This court deals in facts, counselor, not family drama for the evening news. He turned to Dennis. All accounts frozen under the previous order will be released immediately. This injunction should never have been granted on such a flimsy record. Diana stiffened in her seat. Lara looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. The judge wasn't done. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented regarding outside coordination with Skyreach Robotics, This court strongly suggests the plaintiffs consider their exposure before pursuing additional claims. I will not have this courtroom used as a pawn in corporate maneuvering. Peterson sat down slowly. Dennis handed over one final document. Your Honor, we request official entry into the record-clearing ironclad dynamics of any ownership disputes, unless new, credible evidence emerges. Granted, the judge said without hesitation. That was it. Accounts unfrozen. Injunction dead. When we stepped into the hallway, reporters swarmed immediately. Mr. Mercer, what's your response to the ruling? Someone shouted. I kept walking. Read the filings, I said. It's all there. Behind us, Diana and Lara slipped out a side door with Harlow, avoiding cameras altogether. Tessa caught up to me on the courthouse steps. Payroll's processing right now, she said, checking her phone. Vendors, too. Back to normal by tonight. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. For the first time in a week, it felt like we weren't playing defense anymore. That Friday morning, Ironclad's top-floor boardroom was packed. Every seat around the long glass table was taken. Board members, lawyers, a few senior execs. I controlled the voting shares that mattered. The board still had a 7.3 supermajority for cause lever that could remove a CEO if they manufactured grounds. Diana's plan was simple. Manufacture cause, peel off two independents, and make me the problem. The view behind them stretched out over the city, but nobody was looking at it. All eyes were on the stack of papers Diana's attorney had just dropped on the table. Diana sat near the center in a navy suit, posture perfect, Lara on her right looking smug, like she was already moving into my office. Grant Halstead from Skyreach wasn't in the room, but his shadow was everywhere. The transition plan proposal in front of everyone spelled it out. Remove me as CEO, bring in an interim leadership team, and evaluate strategic partnership opportunities. Code for handing the company to Skyreach once I was out of the way. Board chair. Frank Alden cleared his throat. We're here to consider a motion under Bylaw Section 7.3 to remove Colt Mercer as CEO for cause, effective immediately. Diana's lawyer stood. The company has been damaged by public disputes, court actions, and leadership uncertainty. Our proposal ensures stability and opens the door to new opportunities. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, waiting. Frank looked around the table. Discussion before we vote? One board member, Patel, adjusted his glasses. This public mess has hurt investor confidence. I'm not saying I support this plan, but we need answers, Colt. Can you control this situation? Before I could respond, the door opened. Richard Mercer walked in. The room shifted instantly. Half the board straightened like someone had just added gasoline to a fire. Richard hadn't been at any of the hearings or press events. He'd stayed quiet through everything. He didn't sit down. He walked right over to me, pulled a thick envelope from his jacket, and set it on the table. You're going to want this, he said quietly. I opened it. Printed emails. Lots of them. Subject lines jumped out immediately. Equity split post-removal. Skyreach transition terms. Undisclosed compensation agreement. Senders. Diana. Grant Halstead. Martin Harlow. Dates going back 6 months. They weren't just planning to remove me. They were planning exactly how much equity Diana and Lara would get once Skyreach acquired controlling interest. Side payments from Skyreach to Harlow, and even Grant promising Lara a founder title for a new consumer drone division after the takeover. Richard finally spoke loud enough for the room. I may have made mistakes, but I won't sit here while they lie to all of you about their motives. They weren't protecting this company. They were selling it. Diana shot to her feet. Richard, you don't know what you're talking about. I slid the emails across the table toward Frank before she could finish. Board members can read for themselves. Patel grabbed the top page. His eyebrows went up fast. Other members leaned in, scanning the lines. One of them, Marissa Lee, looked straight at Diana. These emails show financial arrangements with Skyreach contingent on Colt's removal. Were you planning to disclose this to the board at any point? Diana's face tightened. Those were preliminary conversations. 6 months of them? Marissa cut in. With signed payment terms? The room started buzzing. I stayed quiet, letting the pages speak. Finally, Frank raised his hand. Enough. We have a motion on the floor, but before we vote, the board needs to consider this new information. He turned to me. Colt, do you have anything else to add? Only this, I said. While they were negotiating side deals, Ironclad signed 2 new logistics contracts in the last quarter and cut operating costs by 8%. We're expanding, not collapsing. The only instability here came from this takeover attempt. Patel closed the folder of emails. I'm ready to vote. Frank nodded. All in favor of removal for cause under Section 7.3? No hands? Opposed? Every hand but Diana's and Laura's. Motion fails. No cause, and short of the two-thirds supermajority. Frank wrote it down. Motion fails. Colt remains CEO. Furthermore, this board will open an internal investigation into any undisclosed agreements involving company assets. Diana's chair screeched as she stood. This isn't over. Laura grabbed her bag, face flushed. Fine. Keep your company. I'll build my own. Bigger, better. You'll see. They stormed out before the meeting even ended. Richard stayed behind for a moment. He didn't look at me when he said, I gave you the emails because the company deserves better than what they were planning. That's all. Then he left too. Frank turned to me. Colt, you've got full backing. Use it wisely. We won't entertain any more drama. Understood, I said. But I knew Laura wouldn't walk away quietly. By the next week, the headlines had changed completely. Ironclad CEO crushes takeover attempt, wins court battle documents, show Skyreach, Mercer family and secret dealings media outlets that had painted me as the villain 2 weeks ago were now running editorials calling the whole thing one of the boldest corporate defense plays in years. Investors who had paused funding calls were suddenly asking about expansion plans instead, and we had one ready. On Wednesday, the contracting officer finalized a multi-year Department of Defense award we'd been queued for, released the moment the court cleared our responsibility review. It was the biggest deal in company history, worth more than every Mercer hauling contract combined from the last 20 years. At the press conference announcing it, I kept it short. Ironclad Dynamics builds technology that delivers. We're expanding operations to 3 new states this year, with international sites planned for next year. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions about Diana, Laura, and the failed takeover. I ignored them. Inside the company, things stabilized fast. Payroll was back on schedule. Vendors who'd gotten nervous during the freeze were signing new agreements. 2 board members personally thanked me for handling the mess without dragging Ironclad into public chaos. Richard called me that Friday. He sounded tired, older somehow. I'm retiring, he said simply. Selling what's left of Mercer Hauling. I'll stay out of your way. It wasn't an apology. I didn't ask for one. I just told him, probably for the best. Diana disappeared from the business scene completely. Last I heard, she was trying to sell a vacation property in Florida. Laura wasn't done. She launched her own drone startup 2 weeks after the boardroom vote. Skylink Systems. Press releases promised next-generation aerial logistics and a new era of innovation. She posted pictures on social media of herself touring warehouses and standing in front of prototype drones like she'd built them herself. By month's end, Skylinks had burned through half its seed funding. 2 prototypes crashed during demos. One investor pulled out after engineers quit mid-project, citing lack of direction. I didn't say a word publicly. Then Laura showed up at Ironclad headquarters unannounced. Tessa came in. She's downstairs demanding to see you. Says it's urgent. I almost sent security but let her up. Laura walked in 5 minutes later, sunglasses on, arms crossed. Congrats on the big contract, she said. Must feel nice getting everything handed to you. Handed? I asked. You used Dad's name and now act like you built this alone, she snapped. Skylinks will crush Ironclad. Investors see potential in me. I waited, then said, 2 drones crashed this week. Your lead engineer quit and took half your code. You don't even own your facility. That's not a company, it's a fire drill with a logo. She flushed. We're just getting started. This isn't about photo ops, I told her. Ironclad delivers freight in sub-zero conditions. We keep oil rigs running in hurricanes. The defense contract? 3 continents. This isn't a game. Dad always said you were cold, she shot back. No loyalty, just ambition. I pointed to the framed contract Richard signed after I bailed him out. You call it ambition, I call it work. Something you've never done. You think money makes you right? No, results do. And you've got none. She didn't answer. I opened the door. Next time you want to compete, bring results, not excuses. She left without another word. Tessa leaned in. That felt final. Yeah, I said. It was. By the end of the quarter, Ironclad opened a new facility in Texas for the defense contract. Revenues hit record highs. Skylinks missed payroll twice and shut down one of its test sites after another failed demo. I tightened internal security. New access protocols, quarterly audits, no single point of failure anywhere. Ironclad would never be vulnerable again. On the day our first military-grade drone fleet launched from the new facility, I watched from the control tower as the aircraft lifted into the sky one by one, engines steady, formation perfect, no speeches, no press stunts, just work getting done, the way it should be.